It's
I'm
going to be a
on.
light,
Okay.
and then Good evening, council and members of public. Welcome to our special committee of the whole meeting for Wednesday, April the 19th, 2023. I'm going to call the meeting to order at 7 p.m. I have a motion that the special committee of the whole agenda for April the 19th, 2023 be approved as presented. Looking for mover by Councilor LaRue, seconded by Councilor Vadabunker. We'll call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? That is carried. Number 3 is declaration of pecuniary interest, either now or at the time of. Any members have any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Number 4 is matters for consideration. This evening, we have a presentation regarding the Georgian Bay Aspiring UNESCO Park. We'll look at the motion and questions from council and members of public after presentation. I'll turn it to our presenter this evening, Mr. Tony Pigott. The floor is yours, sir. The podium is yours. We'll just make sure our microphone's on, and we welcome you to the municipality and thank you for being here to share your presentation with us tonight.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you, councilors, for taking the time to hear about the aspiring geopark and the opportunities that it holds for Penetanguishene. My background is in the advertising and marketing world, as well as having done some international development. But basically, what I've spent my life doing is working with businesses and organizations and places to really help bring out what is genuinely unique and important to share with others. And I am so excited to have the chance to talk to you about the Georgian Bay Aspiring Geopark and Penetanguishene's opportunities within it, because I believe, and I've been coming to Penetanguishene for 50 years because of a cottage that I've got up in Go Home Bay, but this is a very, very special place. And when I say that, it's because there is a gathering of things, the landscape, the culture and history that are so extraordinary, and they are a perfect match for what UNESCO believes are essential places of the world to shine a light on, to protect, and to create opportunities around. So I'm very excited to share this idea of a geopark for all of Georgian Bay, but in particular, what it could mean for Penetanguishene. So if you go to the next slide, just what I'd like to cover, and I just take 15 minutes or 20 minutes of your time to show you these slides and to make sure I've conveyed some of the basics of this idea and what the opportunities are potentially for Penetanguishene. But I'd like to just speak for a second about Penetanguishene and the opportunity, then talk about what global geoparks are in the first place, what the vision and the plan is for the Georgian Bay Aspiring Geopark, and then get into some specific opportunities for Penetanguishene, and a possible outlook on what a year one, what I would call a soft launch is for the Georgian Bay Geopark in Penetanguishene later this year. So if you go to the next slide, I've kind of jumped the gun and started to talk about my feelings about Penetanguishene. And I just want to underscore again that the potential of all of the different aspects and assets that Penetanguishene has, in a way, and don't take this wrong, but it is in many respects less than the sum of your parts right now, and that the Georgian Bay Geopark is a framework and an idea that can really help bring all of that together and demonstrate to the population within Penetanguishene and the region and other parts of Canada and the world, just what an extraordinary place this is. So what I'd like to do in introducing what global geoparks are is show a short film which was put together by UNESCO. And UNESCO is the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization. They are a membership-based assembly that sits every year in Paris. Canada is a very big player in it, but they really do look around the world and try to promote and support education, culture, and science, and particularly have this idea of geoparks that are a mechanism to really cast a light on important places. So this is a glimpse at some of the of this global community, of which there are 177 global geoparks right now in 44 countries. So if you play that video, thank you. Yep. If you go to the next slide, it is quite a remarkable community. And what UNESCO does is identify places in the world which are particularly unique and significant on a global basis. And they provide designation in recognition of those places. And as I said, there are 177 of these parks, and they are not a traditional park. They don't have fences around them and selling tickets to get in. It's a framework that allows communities to participate in showcasing the area, in bringing opportunities of tourism and education into the area. So it's everything from one of the more recent ones in Canada is the Cliffs of Fundy in the Bay of Fundy, which is about 110 kilometers long. Or places like in France, the territory of Beaujolais. So they're regions that are really exceptional geologically, but UNESCO recognizes that geology influences history and culture, and that is a critical factor as well. So quite a new kind of park, as it were, a way to recognize very special regions of the world. And as you saw in that film, it's really quite a global community. If you go to the next slide. This began with a feasibility study which was funded by North Simcoe. And through that, we took a look at all the best practices around the world. And what it shows time and again is that the UNESCO Global Geoparks are a way to provide new energy when it comes to what you would call managed tourism and ways and sustainable development in the places where this has occurred. So it's quite a proven a framework and system, which I think is really germane to what we want to talk about tonight. So if you go to the next slide. In Canada, there are 5 existing global geoparks, UNESCO geoparks. The most recent one I mentioned is the Cliffs of Fundy. And then you have aspiring geoparks. Georgian Bay has been recognized by UNESCO as an aspiring geopark, which means we have in this part of the world all the qualifications in terms of the geological story that we are well positioned to get designation from UNESCO. There are numerous other things that you have to put in place before you get that designation, but that's what aspiring means. So other parts of the country. So one of the next geoparks that is currently aspiring is, for example, in the area of Whistler, where from Squamish to Lillooet, it's about 10,000 square kilometers. They are applying for this final designation from UNESCO. So if you go to the next slide. There has been a lot of research done around the world about the impact that these geoparks can have with the community. And this is a top line on some of the research that was done among the geoparks here in Canada. And long story short, the community's response to the geoparks has been extremely positive. The belief that there are benefits that are coming to the community in terms of revenue, local products, engagement with indigenous communities and the like. So it's a proven system within Canada as well. So that brings us to what we're doing in Georgian Bay and why. So if you go to the next slide, the initiative to create a global geopark for Georgian Bay is really driven by the fact that by the early 2040s, there are going to be more than 10 million people living a couple of hours south. And already, of course, communities are feeling those pressures. The designation that UNESCO provides is a means to build in greater resilience, a term that they use, into communities, resilience to manage growth and climate change and other pressures over time. So we see this framework called the Geopark as a way to contribute to the efforts of communities, other environmental organizations, and First Nations to really be better prepared to manage growth, to bring the kinds of tourism that you're interested in that protect the integrity of the community and the natural surroundings. If you go to the next slide, as I mentioned before, we are now classified as an aspiring geopark because the case for Georgian Bay is incredibly strong. I think everybody in this room loves Georgian Bay. And if you're like me, you've got a sense of some of it, but not all of what makes it amazing. But from a geological point of view, our partner in this is Professor Nick Isles, who is the world's foremost expert on the geology of the Great Lakes. The book that you see up here is one of the books that he's done. And it's a showcase for what we're talking about, is that the dimensions that Georgian Bay has, the incredible geological stories, the diversity of geology and ecology from 2.4 billion years in the north to the limestone cliffs of the Bruce Peninsula. And I'll speak about the particulars of Penetanguishene and the region in a minute. But in addition, this incredible landscape has driven an amazing history, going back 12,000 years with first Paleo Indians, and of course, the rich history that is so well represented in Penetanguishene. So we've got an incredible story in Georgian Bay. If you go to the next slide. We are also determined to define a role where we complement the efforts of others and we contribute to where communities want to go. So in effect, what we are doing as a geopark is bringing innovative science together with indigenous knowledge, and through this combination, generating initiatives and ideas that will support geotourism, which is a particular type of tourism that is, shall we say, a managed form of tourism, educational programs for both high school, university, and the general public, and developing state-of-the-art marketing and communication. That's in here because we believe that one of the most important contributions that we can make is to communicate to the public and to the world how special all of Georgian Bay is and how it deserves to be treated with reverence and respect when people either live here or come here. And through these things done in the geopark, We want to inspire actions and activities that lead to a resilient and sustainable future across all of Georgian Bay. So if you go to the next slide, 2 slides up. Next, thanks. The underpinnings of the geopark are essentially what we call geosites. These are places scattered all over Georgian Bay that represent really exceptional geological stories, which have attached to them other cultural and historical aspects, or just the geological narrative is exceptional. The University of Toronto is a partner in this regard through Nick Isles, and that team has identified now up to 140 of these geosites. And the geosites will also be linked to existing attractions and sites that exist in the communities. But ultimately, these will be communicated in various ways, and people will have a chance to learn about Georgian Bay and experience it at these different sites and in new ways compared to anything that they've seen in the past. Those sites will also be linked to stories of history, Indigenous culture, and the like. So if you go to the next slide. The entirety of Georgian Bay is the area that this geopark will basically represent. It's a very ambitious vision, and yet it is the right vision because all of Georgian Bay is what is really open to positioning and conservation benefits that come from this initiative. The geological story of Georgian Bay breaks down into 7 distinct chapters that each of them has a particularly important and different story to tell of the entirety of Georgian Bay. And the region of Penetanguishene and the region of North Simcoe is one of those regions. So it goes from area number 1, and we're referring to this as deep time, which I'll speak to in a minute, is 2.4 billion years old. And as you go around the clock, each of those areas has a different geological history. And those histories also bring with them a unique human history, history that begins with Indigenous peoples, but of course speaks to the way Canada has developed over the last hundreds of years. So this is essentially the segmentation around Georgian Bay that will allow us to bring really unique stories to each of those regions so that they can be told and become a part of this bigger story of Georgian Bay and the geopark. Go to the next slide. What we believe is that the Georgian Bay Geopark's economic opportunities for each of these regions can be significant. One of the primary ways that benefits will emerge is that this story can help reinforce or enhance the given region's narrative or positioning to the world. As we'll get to in a minute, Penetanguishene has a very unique story. And we believe that the geopark and the UNESCO designation can really add something deeper and quite interesting that allows all the dots to connect in a given region. But in addition, there are practical things that this overview can help deliver, which is engagement with community. And we've seen in other places how that has been very successful as a way of motivating and engaging the public. It can create new activities and business services around this geotourism concept. It can influence investment, including waterfront investment, boating and cruise strategies, which are extremely important here, of course, how it can influence the way you might approach hospitality, festivals, Geo products and brands are a feature of a lot of geoparks globally. And it importantly, and Jack is here and he's been working with us on outreach to First Nation and Métis communities. It's a platform for genuine collaboration with Indigenous communities and of course, cultural events. So all to say that through the experience we see in geoparks around the world, this can be a real catalyst and contributor to the plans and intentions of communities over the long term. Next slide, please. The geopark will also be able to deliver some really tangible things that communities can use. For example, there is a need to go deeper in our understanding of the Bay. We have, in the early days of the geopark, developed a very rich mapping process, coastal mapping process, where leading experts in this area have assembled what is probably the most complex and thorough portrait of the coastline of Georgian Bay from a variety of data sources. So this is one of the ways that we can contribute to municipalities and their understanding of the areas that they're in that may help inform or provide insight when it comes to things like land use planning and development. So next slide, please. We also see it as a great opportunity for education. We have right now, if you go on to our website, there are 8 educational modules that have already been completed. And what these do is take key areas of Georgian Bay and provide teacher-ready curriculum that can work at a high school or post-secondary level that teaches a deeper understanding of Georgian Bay and all of the geological influences on other factors, including the ecology and culture. We're also taking a look at teacher programs. And in fact, this coming summer, we're already working toward developing a Teach the Teachers program here in this region, which will, we believe, lead to programs in schools where high school kids can become qualified to become geo guides. Next slide, please. We also are a great platform to do innovative research. On the one hand, we see, based on the conservation activities that are going around the Bay, that Georgian Bay in its entirety does not have a comprehensive research base to understand what the dynamics are, the vulnerabilities of Georgian Bay. So we believe we can play a role in helping to get there because our perspective is all of Georgian Bay. But to give you an example of some of the innovations, we have just completed the first year of an analysis of certain areas of shoreline which use LiDAR mapping using a drone. And what this does is provide the most detailed profiles of critical shorelines that have been taken in Georgian Bay and are useful to other conservation groups if they're interested in wetlands or different coastal issues. And coastal resilience is important to a lot of communities. So we hope to expand this in all over Georgian Bay. It's going into year 2. It's the kind of data that other conservation groups can use. We've also just been awarded a grant from National Geographic and the Royal Geological Society to do more of this this coming year, where we start to map archaeological sites as well. Next slide, please. Jack is here, and we've been partnered with Jack for many months now in looking at the outreach. UNESCO is very clear that global geoparks must collaborate, plan, and operationalize their geoparks in partnership with First Nations and Métis organizations. And what in Georgian Bay is an amazing fact. There is a concentration of First Nations in this part of the world, unlike any other in Canada, and certainly at a level that UNESCO has not seen before. So Jack has led the process of a segmentation of the entire Georgian Bay into 4 quadrants and a whole regional leadership approach to provide outreach and enroll those communities in collaborations having to do with the geopark, tourism, education, and economic development. That's, of course, a longer story, and perhaps in the Q&A we can go into it a bit deeper. Next slide, please. Pardon me. So I mentioned that communication is important, and what we are doing is developing an approach to the communication of the geopark based on the concept of deep time. We believe that this idea of deep time really tells potentially a multi-layered story about Georgian Bay and invites people into something quite intriguing and interesting. Deep time refers to, of course, the extraordinary geological stories that exist all across the Bay, but it also speaks to the deep time in terms of history of the traditional and ancient knowledge of Indigenous peoples that starts back over 12,000 years ago, to deep time around our own histories. So I mention this as a marketer, I would, but the branding and the idea platform is very important. And we are currently working on creative elements that will help tell this story to a broader public. And that will have, we'll get to that in terms of what we are hoping to do this summer. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to speak to this concept and the opportunities for Penetanguishene itself. I mentioned that our outlook has revealed that there are 7 distinct regions and 7 distinct stories within Georgian Bay. And each of those regions has the opportunity to tell that story and to bring different activities to it. When we look at Penetanguishene and the region, we see this as a very unique and important area, and in many ways, the deepest story of them all. This region is a microcosm for all of Georgian Bay. It represents the ancient Canadian Shield. It has been referred to as the land between, but suffice to say that this combination really is a representation of all of Georgian Bay. It is also, of course, as everybody in this room knows, a region that is genuinely a showcase, not just for geology, but for culture and ecological diversity, and is a powerful story that echoes across the Bay as well, and is, of course, the epicenter of so much history. So the narrative for Penetanguishene in the region is very powerful, very unique, and it is a critical chapter in the broader story of Georgian Bay. And of course, you are a gateway to this extraordinary place. Next slide, please. One more. Thank you. What we are excited to propose is that we have been developing the geopark and the aspiring geopark for 2 years, and would like you to consider a soft launch of the Georgian Bay Geopark in Penetanguishene this coming summer. The opportunity would be to introduce the vision and the first pillars of the geopark, and on a very regionalized basis. And it would demonstrate how it can become an important part of the Penetanguishene community. What I mean by this is that this soft launch in introducing this idea to a broader public would be an invitation to people, an invitation to the public, to educators, to businesses, and to community organizations to get to know this idea of a geopark and the incredible stories that it represents of the entire bay and the particular stories of this part of the world, and to get behind it and contribute to it in various ways. If you go to the next slide. So what our objectives would be in this regard would be to build awareness in the community and the region for the Georgian Bay Geopark and the mission of that park, to position Penetanguishene as a leading gateway to the geopark with its own unique story, to demonstrate the potential benefits of the geopark in terms of business, tourism, education, and the enhancement of existing programs, and begin to enlist the support of citizens, business, educators, tourism operators, conservation groups, and so on. We also see it as a chance to develop very concrete collaborative activities with Boseley First Nation and the Métis Council, as well as Francophone communities within the region. And effectively, during this next period of time, establish the foundation for a longer-term strategy and approach. So if you go to the next slide. The key program elements of this would be an information showcase. It could happen in different parts of Penetanguishene, but the primary one would be at the town dock, which would tell the story of Deep Time and of Penetanguishene's story within it. This would include posters, a regional map, information, and a QR code to an app, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And it would provide both citizens of Penetanguishene and visitors with things to do and explore. So just as an example, if you imagine going down, if you go to the next slide, this is the kind of message you might see. You are standing at the edge of one of the world's greatest geological wonders, Georgian Bay. A story of deep time, of rocks over 2 billion years old that tell us how our world came to be, of landscapes that shaped our deep human history starting over 12,000 years ago. And here in Penetanguishene, the gateway to it all, you can explore and discover many of Georgian Bay's deepest stories, deepest beauty, and deepest histories, all in one extraordinary region. So if you go to the next slide. And so, as I mentioned before, these communications would come through in an information kiosk, brochures, digital ads, and so on, and eventually a video. And then if you go to the next slide, one more, please, into an app. So we are currently working on an app that people would be able to download when they came here at the dock or coming to the session. There is a very live example of this in the Fire and Ice Geopark out of Whistler. And we are going to be using the same framework and app supplier that they have. Effectively, what this allows us to do is to provide people with directions to the geosites, and with those geosites, information around the geosites that they would find interesting. There would be geo tours, in other words, trails in this area that take you from place to place, either by foot or by car, possibly by boat. And it would link to services and attractions that would be geolocated to the region or very locally. If you go to the next slide. And if you do get a chance, do download that app. You'll see how it works, but it's a really wonderful way for people to navigate through and to see and discover things. It's a very educational tool, and it can also become a very entertaining means of people enjoying and engaging with the region because all sorts of different techniques can be built into the app to make it fun or exploratory or even gamified. So if you go to the next slide, the links to from the app uh, between geosites and the trails would include selected businesses, restaurants, cafes, activities, tours, and so on. It would provide educational programs and link to schools and conservation groups. It would also be able to promote and link to events that are already happening here in Penetanguishene. And it also gives us a chance to loop into the particular sites and narratives that First Nations and Métis communities have. So I know that's a lot to digest. It is, we're well along the way in this endeavor. We are prepared to do some exciting, simple things together with Penetanguishene this coming summer. And I'd like to close just with a simple summary of what we are hoping that council will consider. The first is to endorse this idea of a soft launch in Penetanguishene this summer, to agree that our team can work with the town administration on specifics around programs and coordination and communication, and then ultimately get a letter from the town expressing support for our efforts to create this UNESCO geopark. So that's what we propose as the next step. The next slide, please. So I just want to summarize by saying, and forgive me for repeating myself, but this is genuinely a showcase for something really important and extraordinary, and that's Georgian Bay as a geopark. Penetanguishene has so many characteristics that represent important aspects of the entirety of Georgian Bay, and it is a framework and opportunity that the town of Penetanguishene can use to advance your priorities and the different things that you want to see achieved over the next several decades. So that's it from me. This presentation is available, I believe, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Tony. I appreciate you taking the time to come here this evening and share this. It's a tremendous amount of work you've spent, you and your team, and your enthusiasm and passion is heard and resilient through the presentation. So thank you for that. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for the town, every community around Georgian Bay, North Simcoe, Ontario, and our country. But thank you for that. I'll turn it to council for any comments or questions for our presenter this evening. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. When you ask for our ask, you're looking for a spot at our town dock. How big of a spot would you be looking for? What is it that you'd actually require?
We would look to use the existing info center in some fashion, both inside and out, to showcase posters and information boards where basic communication of the geopark and Penetanguishene's story could be conveyed there. So it's really not a large space that we're looking for, and the particulars would really come down to what we figure out working with the administration.
Thank you.
Any other members, any comments or questions? Councillor Vadabunker.
Thank you, Your Worship. A question with respect to any impact on private property rights. So if the area is designated as a geopark, is there any impact on private property rights?
Thank you. I should have mentioned that when I said it's a new kind of park. This has no override. There are no property rights. There's nothing that would restrict development. So it is a designation that does not interfere in that way.
Thank you, Tony. Another question. We chatted briefly. I had mentioned to you when we were introduced that I was familiar with Georgian Bay had already been designated as one of 19 biosphere reserves in Canada. And I was just want to understand the relationship between a UNESCO biosphere reserve and a UNESCO geopark.
There are what they call overlapping designations between biospheres and geoparks and biospheres and other UNESCO designations. And essentially what UNESCO looks to do is for the two groups to collaborate and develop a way to make sure that there is clarity in the public eye about how this is all communicated, how we can complement each other. So as an example, our research would be contributing to the biospheres research because we would be providing an understanding of geology in ways that could help them on their ecological mission. And we are also a big educator. So their educational efforts are along an ecological front, and this could be quite complementary in that way. When it comes to communication, it gets a little bit more complicated. So that's why we really have to sit down and plan communications for that. I mean, their areas from Severn to the French River, and we've already met with them twice, and we will end up with a kind of complementary plan so that we don't stumble all over each other.
It's all yours.
Thank you, Your Worship. There's one national park that I'm aware of, and there's at least 3 provincial parks that I'm aware of in Georgian Bay. What's the relationship between UNESCO and the Geopark and these provincial and national parks?
They will be a major partner throughout Georgian Bay. And the reason for that is that with each of them, and it could be Fathom 5 up in Tobermory or Awenda, it's because we can contribute to their efforts in bringing another story, another level of exploration and education to what they want to do. And we can also help market, because in any area where we are going to be promoting the Georgian Bay Geopark, we will be linked to those other parks, and we will be basically helping each other. So it's extremely complementary, and they'll be a very important partner.
Thank you.
Councillor Mershaw, you had your hand up, I believe.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much for the presentation. In terms of the ask, you're looking to coordinate with town administration on program and communications. Is the thought that we would educate our staff, summer staff, on this program, and so we would work together collaboratively in terms of how we're doing this deep time education to those coming to the community? We
would love that to happen, to provide an introduction and a bit of an immersion in what the Geopark and what the story is here to anyone in the administration, particularly those that are public facing.
Councillor LaRue.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tony, a very interesting and very intriguing presentation, I must say. We have been working for this past while on a strategic plan, and I can see this blending in very well with our strategic plan. So thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor LaRue. Any other council members, any comments or questions? Councillor Vadwalker.
Thank you, Worship. Just with respect to looking into the future, if you're successful in establishing Georgian Bay as a geopark, what is the ongoing commitment, and how is that commitment addressed? Is it through volunteers? Is it through paid staff? Is it our staff? What's that ongoing commitment once the geopark has been established?
There will, we're currently an incorporated not-for-profit, and looking at other geoparks in Canada and around the world, we will end up with a small operation that serves all the communities. Think of it almost like a franchise model where materials, education, research, and whatnot can be gathered and developed by our team and distributed to all the parties that can make use of it or contribute to their own programs. I failed to mention that we're working with Killarney right now. So we're in the beauty is that, I mean, the opportunity for Penetanguishene in the region is that there's a way to be a front runner in this because we are moving from region to region. And Killarney is the only other region that we are currently working with who are all over this in terms of a soft launch. So this gateway opportunity, because of your traditional position in Georgian Bay, is a huge opportunity. And we will grow as this central resource. It will end up, based on other evidence from geoparks around the world, the funding model for that will be a combination where we demonstrate the value of what we're providing to communities, and there is some revenue flow. But what we've seen is that regional governments and so on see it as an important asset for economic development and regional representation. So there's nothing but success in terms of sustainable funding models out there as well.
Thank you.
Any other council members, any further comments or questions? We'll turn to our town staff. Any comments or questions? Members of the public, any comments or questions? What we'll do, maybe, could we use the mic by Andrea tonight? Is that possible? So we'll just get you to go by Andrea, just so we can get the comment on the mic, and then Tony can use the podium. Thank you.
Just grab it. My name is Gunter. I think maybe I missed it, but perhaps you mentioned the timeline and what's involved in applying for this designation. There's a process, and I'm just curious. I think you may have alluded to that, but just please enlighten me. The process, how long, how arduous is it? I'm curious about that. The other thing I would say is that if we are able to successfully get this designation, I can see, the UNESCO designation being something that really brings in a lot of people. And there could be considerable development. The Georgian Bay is a big area. There are many ways in which one could access Georgian Bay, not just Penetanguishene. And my concern is that, as this designation is achieved, that more and more attention will very, very quickly come to this region, and there'll be, ways, there'll be people looking for, well, how do we access this? And when we get off the plane in Toronto, where do we go? And if Penetanguishene doesn't take urgent steps to position itself as the place to start one's voyage through this area, I think we'll miss out on a big opportunity. So the reason I mention this is because there's some urgency to this. I mean, of course, there's a process applying for the geopark designation, but while it's all happening, we can't wait for this to unfold. We have to position ourselves so that we're the ones ready and we're the ones who are going to welcome the world who will come here. So sorry, that was my point, a question and a point.
Well, in terms of the timing for designation, we've been at this for 2 years. We are going to be putting in our first, the application for designation by the end of this year. That then goes to the Canadian, this will sound a bit bureaucratic, but it goes to the Canadian UNESCO Geopark group, who evaluate it, give you feedback, then come and inspect or do a bit of a review or visit. They then take their report and our application and send it to UNESCO Paris, and they evaluate it and then give back feedback, and then they come over. So all that's going to take 2 years. If we're successful in that time frame, it may take longer, but that's what we're aiming at right now. No question that this is, the most ambitious UNESCO geopark that's been undertaken in the world. It is also likely to be one of the largest, if not the largest. So we are doing something that that represents all of Georgian Bay. That's where the big opportunities and benefits lie. But it's going to be a complex, exciting, but complex challenge.
And then the challenge again will be for us.
Into the mic, please.
Right. The challenge for us is, will be to position ourselves as the destination, the go-to destination, a place to start, as opposed to Collingwood or other places. So, if we're not careful, we could lose a really valuable opportunity. So I think it's going to be essential for us to work together earnestly in a collaborative manner and think about ways that are transformative for this area, and then people will come. I'm a tourist myself, and that I travel enough that it's we go to destinations that are UNESCO sites. We look for them. The first video that you were showing, the clip, it starts off with a still image. That's Stone Forest in Yunnan Province, where just a stone step away from where my wife comes. And so there are people around the world who are better able to travel than ever before, fly around. And when people think about Canada, it's like, oh, maybe Niagara Falls. But it's not that far to go in this direction. And people will come here, but they're going to want to go, well, where do we access this? How do we see these wonderful things? And they'll have to see a bit more than what we've got at our town dock and the parking lot next to the launch. Sorry.
Do we have any other comments or questions from anybody in the public? So I'll give you the microphone by Andrea there, if you don't mind, please.
Thank you for the presentation, Tony. It was really exciting. And again, thank you. I'm just curious, in your experience or your knowledge in trying to get these things going, and I'll use, the Cliffs of Fundy as an example, or Whistler. We've heard all the positives here tonight, but what resistance or pushback or significant challenges or maybe even hurdles have you encountered, or what we might expect, if any, along the way?
Thanks, and that's an important question to ask. So far, where people encounter resistance are, for example, conservation groups who don't want to have more activities, or I wouldn't say competition, that sounds pejorative, but confusing people about who's doing what. So there's typically a time frame that's required for conservation groups to get really familiar with this idea and figure out how it's complementary and works with them. But that's one area. There have been some geoparks in Canada that have had pushback from First Nations. There was a case in Whistler right now where the Lillooet are having a problem. Communities themselves sometimes take a bit of time to understand what the benefits are and how this will help me, and what's it going to cost. And there's typically going to be some confusion until the story gets out there. So it's a bit of a mixed bag of things. But I can tell you so to date, because the affection for Georgian Bay is so deep, wherever you go, that people want to get involved, they want to learn more, and they want to figure out how this can work. Because I think everybody in their bones realizes that there's some real vulnerabilities to Georgian Bay over time, and that this framework could contribute to ways to make sure that when people do come here, which is inevitable, that they come here with respect, and that it isn't buses and buses of people, but that there are certain types of people that come here because they want to experience something that's really quite deep and interesting and nature-based.
Do any other members have any comments or questions for our presenter this evening? Seeing none. Tony, I have one question if I can, which you spoke about. And can you just speak a little bit about some of the collaboration you and your group has done with our First Nation communities around Georgian Bay? You know, there's a lot of First Nation Indigenous groups that you're mentioning. Can you just give us some insight to what that's looked like? You mentioned that Jack's been party to this, but can you just give us some insight?
Well, I'll be speaking on behalf of Jack. Do you want to comment on that, or do you want me to give it a shot? Do speak on it if you wouldn't mind. Sure, come on. Why don't you use this?
Thank you, Your Worship, for the question. With the Geopark for Georgian Bay incorporates what over 27 First Nations on Georgian Bay. So it's going to be unique in the landscape that Tony has talked about, just in terms of geography, locality, going back to the history of First Nations, going back 13,000 years ago, and then coming up to the present, where we have First Nations on Georgian Bay. How we looked at public consultation, information sessions with First Nations. We conducted 4 last fall and late summer. So we went to the Beausoleil First Nation. We went to Moose Deer. We also went to speak with the Huron-Wendat of Quebec. They're all very supportive of the aspect of what a geopark could mean. We have to look at opportunities for First Nations, whether it's in tourism, economic development, the aspect of understanding what First Nations needs are in tourism. We like to call it sustainable tourism. There is a workshop this weekend in the Blue Mountains, Beaver Valley. There's a specialist coming in to talk about sustainable tourism, ecotourism. How does this apply to First Nations? The aspect that in return of First Nations commenting, it's all new, but their interest is also in protection of Mother Earth. So we got to find ways to look at that and use their knowledge, which Tony alluded to, in terms of the aspect of a two-eyed seeing process. I'm not quite sure if you're familiar with the two-eyed seeing. It's a look at a perspective from the Indigenous eyes, as well as the non-Indigenous from a scientific point of view. So to find that balance in that language, this is the type of questions we asked our First Nations, and it comes in storytelling. You heard of the legend of the 30,000 Islands and Kitchikawana for this area. There is some authenticity to that story. There's also some authenticity to the story of more of the French River area of the giant beaver creating a dam and flooding Georgian Bay and creating 30,000 islands. And in geology, they call it geomythology. It's a verification by anthropologists to come up with a definition meaning of these stories to be true. And it's not just a story, there's more to it. And that's one of the aspects that we're asking First Nations to speak with elders to tell these stories, keep these stories, and how it fits into the history of geology. I think the focus of geology is the main thrust for a geopark. I spent many years on the Biosphere Reserve that was mentioned. I was one of the founding members for the Georgian Bay Biosphere Reserve. And that started in 1994. And it got designated in 2004. We're going through the same process here for the geopark, but it incorporates meeting with the people of Georgian Bay, and that includes First Nations. So the uniqueness is you have to look at the history of understanding the treaties that were signed. There were treaties prior to Europeans coming here. It's called the Dish with One Spoon. It was a wampum belt that shared the land. nobody owned the land from the First Nations perspective. All that is a conservation approach to protecting Mother Earth. We want to adopt those principles from First Nations. We need to get the support to say, yes, we like that principle. Yes, we can work with the non-Indigenous community to make this happen. And we're trying to find these ways, but the information comes in through these consultations. So there's a lot of meetings that will occur in the next year or so. We'll begin with this by going up along the eastern seaboard or coastal area of Georgian Bay, up through Manitoulin, the North Shore. So there's a lot of information that needs to be shared, but also information that needs to be collected from First Nations to ensure they're inclusive. They're going to be a partner, and we will not move unless they're part of the process. And we want to ensure that we do this with our partners, and all partners, whether it's provincial parks, national parks, conservation areas, they all have a role to play. It's also looking at sustainable tourism to protect the activity of certain areas. So it's not just a basic tourism destination, it's a planned process. And I think that's what we're looking at. So First Nations is a big partner to do this. So I hope I've answered some of that. Thank you.
Tony, can you just try to grab that microphone for me? Thank you. Any members of council, any closing comments, questions? I'll get you to go to the podium by Andrea there, Stu.
Tony, I'm thinking you might want to communicate on the volunteer activity on your team. This is not a team of 100 well-compensated people.
Thank you. We have established a working group of about 14 people. They're all volunteers, and it's kind of like Ocean's 11. They're just amazing, expert people with a deep passion for Georgian Bay. Whether they are experts on coastal mapping or Jack's expertise in parks and Indigenous collaboration and negotiation, and Nick Isles, who's the world's foremost authority on the rocks of this place. We brought in amazing marketing people, et cetera, et cetera. So we're a very lean machine right now, and it's working.
Thank you so much, Tony. Thank you on behalf of our council and our staff and our community. Thank you for sharing this tonight, and congratulations on all your work, your passion, your enthusiasm, your drive. This is phenomenal for the region. So thank you for everything. I think it's tremendous. I just want to share with you, today I was actually reached out by our member of parliament, Adam Chambers, who mentioned that he heard that you were coming here this evening. Wanted to state that he was a big supporter of the geopark and that he is open to provide as much support as he can for your project, not just for our community, but for the region and every community around the region. So you have his support, and thank you again. Moving on, council, I've got a recommendation. Be it resolved that council receives a presentation from the executive director of the aspiring Georgian Bay Geopark, and the council requests the chief administrative officer to provide a fulsome report back to council in due course on the request provided by the group. I'm looking for a mover, Councillor LaRue, seconder, Councillor Drush. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? And that is carried. 5 is our question period from the media and public. Do we have any questions from the media or public? Seeing none, we'll look for an adjournment at 8:03. Looking for a mover, Councillor Marchand, seconder, Councillor Drush. All in favor? And opposed, and that is carried. Have a good evening. Thank you again, everyone, for participating and coming out tonight.